Right now, something quiet is happening to the global food supply, and most people won't notice it until it's already affecting them. It's not the dramatic image of empty shelves that movies have trained us to fear. It's not a sudden collapse or a single catastrophic event. It's something slower, subtler, and in many ways far more difficult to defend against. It's the creeping reality of meals that become harder to put together. Ingredients that used to be affordable suddenly aren't. Foods you counted on quietly disappearing from your usual routine, not because of a disaster, but because of 1,000 small shifts happening all at once in the global system that feeds us. And here's the thing most people don't realize. By the time you feel it, you're already behind. In this video, we're going to change that. We're going to walk through exactly what's happening, why it matters to your household right now, and most importantly, what you can do about it today. Specifically, we're covering 15 essential foods that form the backbone of a resilient, flexible pantry. Not a bunker, not a stockpile, a living, usable foundation that keeps your family fed, nourished, and stable, no matter what the world looks like outside your door. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what to buy, why each item matters, and how to use them together to build real meals, not just survival rations. Stick around because the last section is where everything comes together into a practical strategy you can start using immediately. Welcome to Food Decider, where we cut through the noise and give you real, actionable food knowledge for the world we actually live in. If that sounds like something you want more of, hit subscribe and leave a like. It genuinely helps this information reach the people who need it most. Now, let's get into it. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. The threat to your food security probably doesn't look like what you think it does. Most people, when they imagine a food crisis, picture something dramatic. Store shelves stripped bare overnight, long lines, rationing, the kind of imagery that belongs in a film. And because everyday life doesn't look like that, because the grocery store is still open, the shelves are still mostly full, they conclude that everything is fine, that there's nothing to prepare for. But that conclusion misses something important. The real disruption isn't sudden, it's gradual. And gradual is actually harder to respond to, because by the time it's obvious, you've already been losing ground for months. Think about what actually connects your food to your plate. Before anything reaches your kitchen, it travels through an intricate web of energy, logistics, agriculture, and global trade. Oil prices determine how much it costs to ship goods across oceans and continents. Geopolitical tensions, the kind that flare up between major economies or in key oil-producing regions, send ripples through that entire system almost immediately. Transportation costs rise, agricultural inputs like fertilizer become more expensive, and those costs don't disappear. They transfer quietly and consistently onto the price tag of the food you buy every week. This is already happening. It's not a forecast, and the households that feel it most are the ones who haven't built any buffer into the way they eat. Now, here's where it gets more personal and more important. When meals become harder to put together, the effects don't announce themselves dramatically either. What happens instead is subtler and more corrosive. You start eating less consistently. Breakfast gets skipped because the usual ingredients aren't around. Dinner becomes whatever's left rather than something intentional. The structure of eating, which most of us take completely for granted, starts to fragment. And that fragmentation has real consequences. Fatigue sets in. Concentration drops. The mental energy required to navigate an already stressful environment starts to deplete faster. And all of this happens not because there's no food in the world, but because your household doesn't have the right foods on hand to keep routines intact. This is what food insecurity actually looks like for most families in a disrupted but not collapsed system. It's not starvation, it's the slow erosion of stability, energy, and normalcy, and it's entirely preventable. The answer isn't panic buying. That's worth saying clearly and directly, because panic buying is both ineffective and counterproductive. It's reactive, wasteful, and often results in a cluttered collection of random foods that don't actually work together to form real meals. Cleaning out a store shelf of bottled water and canned soup might feel like preparation, but it isn't, not in any meaningful sense. What actually works is something far more deliberate and far less dramatic. It's the idea of a foundational pantry, a carefully chosen collection of foods that are shelf-stable, nutritionally complete, endlessly versatile, and above all, foods you actually use, not foods you store away and forget, foods you live with, rotate through, and replenish as part of your normal routine. The distinction between surviving and thriving in an uncertain food environment comes down to this: can you assemble real meals, not just edible combinations of random ingredients, but actual nourishing, satisfying meals with what you have?
Can you maintain the rhythm of eating even when your usual options are temporarily unavailable or unaffordable? That's what a foundational pantry enables, and that's exactly what we're going to build together in this video. Let's talk about the 15 foods themselves. These aren't random selections. Every item on this list was chosen for a specific reason: shelf stability, nutritional value, versatility, and the role it plays in helping you assemble complete meals rather than just individual components. Think of them in layers. The first layer is your energy core. The second is your protein and fat foundation. And the third is what keeps your meals flavorful, nutritious, and worth eating. Start with dried noodles. They might seem ordinary, almost too obvious to mention, but that ordinariness is exactly the point. Dried noodles are one of the most powerful connectors in a resilient pantry. They don't stand alone as a meal. What they do is transform whatever else you have on hand into something structured and satisfying. A handful of noodles, a can of tomatoes, and a drizzle of oil becomes pasta. Add canned fish and a few spices, and suddenly you have a complete protein-rich dinner. They're the thread that holds a meal together when ingredients are limited, and they're among the first things to see price volatility during supply disruptions, which makes having them in consistent supply especially valuable. White rice plays a similar but even more foundational role. Rice is the cornerstone of meal predictability. It portions easily, stores almost indefinitely, pairs with virtually everything, and provides reliable energy without requiring any complexity in preparation. When everything else feels uncertain, rice is the anchor. It combines with beans for a nutritionally complete protein source. It absorbs the flavors of whatever sauce or seasoning you add to it. It stretches other ingredients further. Without rice as a foundation, meals become harder to organize and easier to skip. Oats solve a different but equally important problem: the morning barrier. When disruption sets in, one of the first casualties is breakfast. It requires energy and ingredients that might not be readily available. Oats eliminate that barrier entirely. They need nothing more than hot water. They provide sustained energy that carries you through the first half of the day, and they're flexible enough to serve as a base for baked goods or a quick addition to smoothies. In the context of maintaining routine and preventing meal fragmentation, oats are quietly indispensable. Instant potatoes might feel like a compromise, and in a sense they are, but it's a valuable one. The key advantage they offer is their independence from extended cooking and fuel. When energy costs spike or circumstances make traditional cooking less practical, instant potatoes require only hot water and a few minutes. They're not a replacement for fresh vegetables, and they don't pretend to be. What they are is a buffer, a way to maintain nourishment and provide a familiar, comforting food when the conditions for conventional cooking break down. Now move into the protein layer, because this is where most household pantries have their most critical gap. Protein is typically the most fragile component of a meal. It's the most dependent on refrigeration, the most vulnerable to price spikes, and the first thing that disappears from a meal when budgets or options are constrained. Lentils address this vulnerability in a way that almost nothing else can. Lentils cook quickly. Most varieties need no soaking, and they require no refrigeration. They're dense with protein and fiber, and they integrate seamlessly into soups, stews, rice dishes, and salads. As meat becomes less affordable or less consistently available, lentils don't just fill the gap, they do it without requiring any special planning or preparation. They're not glamorous, but they're genuinely powerful in the context of a resilient pantry. Canned beans go a step further in terms of immediacy. When cooking isn't possible, when you're exhausted, when the energy situation is complicated, when time simply isn't available, canned beans offer complete nutrition with essentially zero preparation required. Open the can, eat the beans, add them to whatever else is available. Mix them with canned tomatoes and spices for something that resembles a real meal with almost no effort. This immediacy is their defining quality, and it's what makes them indispensable on days when the barrier to eating is higher than usual. Canned fish or meat takes the protein layer further still.
These items represent shelf-stable, complete protein foods that pair effortlessly with the carbohydrate base you've already established. Canned tuna over rice is a complete meal. Sardines with pasta is filling and nutritious. Canned chicken in a quick soup satisfies in a way that grains alone never can. Without this kind of shelf-stable protein, meals gradually lose the depth and staying power that keeps energy and morale stable throughout the day. Peanut butter occupies a slightly different but equally critical role. It requires no preparation at all. On days when cooking isn't going to happen, and those days come for everyone, especially in high-stress periods, peanut butter on bread, or simply by the spoonful, bridges the gap between meals without sacrifice. Its fat and protein content provide sustained energy, and it's one of the few truly immediate foods that also genuinely satisfies. Think of it as your fail-safe for the moments when everything else requires more than you can give. Cooking oil is perhaps the most underappreciated item on this entire list. When a meal is reduced to its most basic components, rice, beans, a few vegetables, the difference between a meal that feels like nourishment and one that feels like punishment is often a tablespoon of oil. It adds richness, it increases satiety, it helps the body absorb fat-soluble vitamins that would otherwise pass through unused. And because global oil markets are among the most sensitive to geopolitical disruption, securing a reliable supply of cooking oil ahead of price spikes is one of the most practical things a household can do. Now into the third layer, the one that most people underestimate, and the one that often determines whether a pantry actually gets used. Canned tomatoes are not a vegetable substitute, they are a flavor engine. When you have rice, noodles, and beans, but nothing that ties them together into something worth eating, canned tomatoes do that work. They become the sauce for pasta, the base for stew, the liquid that transforms dried lentils into something deeply satisfying. Without them, meals made from pantry staples become monotonous quickly, and monotony leads to unused food and disrupted eating habits. With them, the same 5 ingredients can produce a dozen different, genuinely enjoyable meals. Canned vegetables function as nutritional insurance. Meals built on grains and legumes meet energy requirements, but they're incomplete without micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals that keep immune function, mental clarity, and overall health intact over time. Canned corn, green beans, peas, or mixed vegetables add variety, color, and the nutritional balance that prevents gradual health erosion when fresh produce becomes temporarily unavailable or unaffordable. Salt and spices are where the psychology of eating becomes as important as the nutrition. Food that has no flavor is food that people stop eating. Habits erode, portions shrink, meals get skipped. The entire foundation of routine breaks down not because there's nothing to eat, but because what's available no longer feels worth eating. A well-stocked spice collection, even something as simple as cumin, paprika, garlic powder, and chili flakes, transforms the same base ingredients into a rotating menu of distinct, appealing meals. Salt balances, spices elevate. Together, they keep the habit of eating intact when options are limited. Shelf-stable UHT milk exists to preserve the small daily rituals that anchor routine. Morning coffee with milk, cereal, a warm drink before bed. These rituals are not trivial, they provide psychological continuity in disrupted times. Fresh milk's complete dependence on refrigeration and cold chain logistics makes it one of the first items to become unreliable during disruptions. UHT milk sidesteps that vulnerability entirely, remaining shelf-stable until opened, without any compromise in usability for cooking, baking, or drinking. Powdered milk extends that stability even further. Where UHT milk handles the immediate term, powdered milk covers the longer horizon. It lasts for months, reconstitutes easily, and integrates into baked goods, sauces, and porridge in ways that make it a genuinely versatile ingredient, rather than just a backup option. Having both means you're covered across different time frames and different types of need. And finally, honey. Honey is the only food on this list that essentially never expires. Its natural antibacterial properties and low moisture content make it immune to spoilage under normal storage conditions. Beyond that, it's a quick energy source, a flexible sweetener for oats, bread, tea, and dozens of other applications. And perhaps most importantly, it's one of those small comforts that preserves a sense of normalcy when things around you feel uncertain. A drizzle of honey on oatmeal on a difficult morning is a small thing, but small things repeated consistently are what keep morale and routine intact when options are limited. Now that you know what these 15 foods are and why they matter, the real question is how to actually build this pantry, and more importantly, how to use it in a way that makes it genuinely resilient rather than just decorative. The first and most critical principle is to resist the impulse to do this all at once. Panic buying, even of the right foods, is still panic buying, and it carries the same problems. You end up with quantities you don't know how to rotate, items that expire before you use them, and a collection of food that sits untouched because it doesn't feel integrated into your normal routine. That's not a pantry, that's just a pile. The goal instead is to build this gradually and deliberately. Add a few items each week as part of your regular shopping. Prioritize the items that serve double duty, the ones that work both as immediate solutions and as long-term building blocks. Canned beans can be eaten today or stored for months. Oats serve breakfast every morning or sit ready for when fresh options disappear. Honey sweetens this week's oatmeal and will still be perfectly usable.
By integrating these foods into your active routine, you ensure they're always fresh, always familiar, and always actually useful when you need them. The second principle is pairing. Individual ingredients from this list are useful, but the real power of a foundational pantry comes from knowing how they work together. Rice and lentils form a nutritionally complete protein when combined, providing all essential amino acids without any animal products. Noodles with canned fish and a spoonful of oil is a balanced, satisfying meal in under 10 minutes. Oats with powdered milk and honey is a complete calorie-dense breakfast that requires nothing more than hot water. Canned tomatoes with beans and spices becomes a meal that could appear on any restaurant menu. Understanding these combinations means you're never staring at your pantry wondering what to do with what you have. You have a mental map of how the ingredients connect, and that map lets you cook efficiently and confidently even when your usual options aren't available. The third principle addresses something that even well-prepared households often get wrong: nutritional balance under pressure. When circumstances limit your options, it's tempting to lean entirely on carbohydrates. They're filling, they're easy, and there are several of them on this list. But carbohydrates alone, sustained over days or weeks, lead to energy crashes, micronutrient deficiencies, and the kind of gradual physical decline that sneaks up quietly. The protein items on this list, lentils, canned beans, canned fish or meat, peanut butter, need to appear at every meal. The canned vegetables provide the micronutrients that grains can't. The cooking oil ensures fat-soluble vitamins are actually absorbed. The milk adds calcium and additional protein. The spices, beyond flavor, actually carry their own micronutrient value. A pantry that's stocked with all 15 items and used thoughtfully produces meals that are genuinely nutritionally complete, not just calorically adequate. The fourth principle, and perhaps the most undervalued one, is the role of routine and morale in a disrupted environment. Food isn't just fuel, it's ritual, comfort, and social structure. The smell of something cooking, a familiar taste in the morning, the act of sitting down to a real meal rather than just grabbing whatever's available. These things matter enormously to mental resilience, and they're the first things to erode when food becomes purely functional. This is why honey is on the list alongside rice and lentils. It's why salt and spices matter as much as canned fish. It's why UHT Milk exists to preserve your morning coffee ritual even when the supply chain for fresh dairy is strained. A pantry that only meets caloric needs will keep your body going. A pantry built on these 15 essentials keeps your body going and your sense of normalcy intact. And that second part is what determines how well people actually function when things get hard. The final point is this. Everything described in this video is most effective when it starts before you need it, not when prices have already spiked, not when shelves are already thinning, not when the news cycle is already alarming. The value of a foundational pantry is precisely that it removes the urgency from the situation. When disruption comes, and in some form it always does, you don't need to respond. You're already prepared. The meals are already possible. The routines are already supported. The stress of the moment is absorbed by the buffer you built in the quiet time before things shifted. That's the quiet power of genuine preparedness. It's not dramatic, it doesn't look like anything from the outside. It just means that when the world gets unpredictable, your kitchen doesn't. Start this week. Not with a full cart of emergency supplies, just a few extra cans of beans, a bag of lentils, a jar of peanut butter, a container of oats. Build from there. Use these foods regularly, learn how they work together, and over the next few weeks, you'll find that you've built something genuinely valuable. Not a bunker, but a foundation, a quiet, practical buffer between whatever the world does next and the stability of your daily life. That's food security, and it was available to you